So let me start today with actually just a little bit of a confession. Scrabble is not my favorite game. And anybody who's perhaps received an email from me or a note can probably guess why. In the universe of things that I do think that I'm maybe good or talented at, spelling is not one of them. And it turns out being able to spell and actually just having a good grasp of language and vocabulary is important if one wants to be successful at the game of Scrabble. Because, frankly, in order to play the game, we all have to agree on what a word is and what a word isn't, and how those words are spelled. Now, traditionally when you play the game, you're limited to words you would find in the dictionary, and you don't usually use proper nouns or, names of places or, things like that. Sometimes, though, we play variants, where as long as we all agree, we can bring in some other words. A couple of times in college, we played Nerd Scrabble, where we allowed things like computer names and acronyms, so you could use TCP/IP or SCSI or, things like that. I've actually seen one variant that allowed a whole lot more slang words. It was called the TMZ version, and so long as you could demonstrate the word was used in a TMZ headline, it became a valid word, which you can imagine opens up all sorts of new possibilities. Truth is, you can have as much fun with this as you want to when you're playing the game. Again, so long as everybody agrees. That's actually one of the things that just language in general does, right? Language in general sort of binds us together. In order for language itself to work, we all have to agree that certain words are what they are, that they're spelled a certain way, and that they mean a certain thing. Frankly, life, society, wouldn't function if we didn't do that. Now, we might not think of language as a technology, but the truth is, it is. It is something that we have invented and come up with that we use to aid in our communication. Language is as much a technology as our smartphones are, or the TV, or any of those other things that we've come up to help us communicate and link ourselves together. Technology, it turns out, comes in many forms. Today's scripture, the Tower of Babbel story, actually is fundamentally, first and foremost, about a new technology. And it's probably, again, like language, one that we don't think about a lot. We probably take it for granted because it just seems so fundamental, right? Like we grow up learning to speak. It becomes one of these things that's always been there, so we don't really think about it as something that had to be thought up or invented. And similarly, the Tower of Babbel story revolves around another technology that likely we all take for granted. And that, of course, is the brick. Now, you may think of bricks as something you want to throw at your technology when it's not working in the way that you want it to. But the truth is, the brick itself actually is a really important and fundamental invention of humankind. If you've ever tried to stack irregular stones together and build like a tower out of it or something, you know that there's a limit to how far you can go before things start to fall down and, the new rock on top just rolls off. And again, it's because they're irregular and they don't fit together neatly. And so it requires a lot more work and effort to make them do that if your goal is to build something like a wall or a foundation or a tower. Now, enter the humble brick, right? Suddenly, you have these building material that they're all generally about the same size. They all generally fit together in the right way. And suddenly there's all these new possibilities that are open for what you can do and how high you can build. So it's no wonder that this story starts by saying that people first and foremost invent the brick and mortar. And after they do that, they get really enamored and excited about it. And they start to wonder, like, I wonder how high we could build. And so they start constructing a city, and they start constructing this big, tall tower. Now, sometimes we think of this as a story about pride, that the reason that God looks down at the tower with displeasure is that we feel like maybe God thinks people are being arrogant. We're being prideful, and that's probably part of the story. But I don't think that that's really actually at the heart of the story, because we have to ask ourselves, why? Why do these people want this big, tall tower? Well, why do you ever want a tower? Why do you want a lighthouse? Why do you want Big Ben? Why do you want these big, tall things? You want them because they can be seen, right? They can be seen from far away. It gives you a place to orient yourself to. Right? No matter where you are, if you can see that tower, you know what direction you are facing. Right? And so that's one of the big reasons why, that is the reason why, that people wanted to build this tower in the first place. They wanted something basically at the center. They wanted something for themselves to all orient themselves to. They wanted something that would keep them together, keep them whole, and frankly, keep them homogeneous, right? They wanted to keep everybody the same. And so if we built this big, tall tower that we can all look at, then that would help keep us all together. We wouldn't be scattered to all the various places, and we would continue to all be and perhaps look and act the same. And then God looks down, and God doesn't like this. God doesn't like this because God actually has a different plan for people. Only a few chapters before, God told people, go, be fruitful and multiply, right? Spread yourself throughout the earth and settle it. And in order for us to do that, we're going to have to settle in different places with different climates and different things going on, which means we're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to change. Frankly, in order for human beings to live out the call that God put on them, we're going to have to diversify. If we're going to really spread out and go all to all the corners of the earth, then we can't all stay the same. We have to diversify. We have to become a more diverse species. And it turns out when God looks down at this tower and this attempt to keep everybody all in the same place and everybody looking the same, God is not pleased, because that's not the plan. Now, if we're being honest, I think we would all confess that we actually generally like being around people who are like us. We like being around people who share our interests. We like being around people who get the same inside jokes that we get, who enjoy the same hobbies that we enjoy. It's why we, join clubs and form bowling leagues and flower guilds and, all those sorts of things, right? Is so that we can be around and enjoy the company of people who enjoy the same things that we do. Now, I don't think this is a problem. I don't think this is actually a bad thing. But we also have to recognize the limits of it, because while it's nice to be around people who are generally the same to us and it's going to feel familiar, it can also get rather boring. And we can find ourselves missing out on the opportunities for growth and discovery that happens from being around people who aren't like us. As I was thinking and reflecting on this, I couldn't help but thinking about my first career as a software engineer. And in truth, when I was in college and preparing and getting my degree, I was generally around people that were generally like me. There was kind of a type for us in computer science. And I'm not going to go too far down the path describing the type, but you can probably imagine it. And we were all fairly generally the same. We all had generally the same interests. And in many ways, we were in it for generally the same reasons. We were enamored with the technology. We were enamored with what programming and computers could do. We were inspired by them. We were curious about how far things would go. And then when things like the internet came along and that ability to connect each other together, there was also this general feeling of optimism about those days and amongst those folks about how this was going to affect and change maybe fundamental things about the world. And looking back on it some 25-ish years later, I mean, certainly in many ways that's proven to be true. The world is very different today because of all the technology than it was before. But I also remember after, college and entering the workforce and taking on real jobs and real responsibilities, what it was like to find myself suddenly in the company of people who weren't like me. And especially when I worked in public health, and I wrote software for public health. And one of the things that our primary product that I work on was a vaccine registry. So we would work with states, and states would collect the data about who got what vaccines and who needed what vaccines, so they could send reminders and work with doctors and make sure all the schedules were being followed and all those sorts of stuff. And it presented a lot of really unique technical challenges for like, how do you manage all of this data and how do we communicate with these people? And I remember, we would, do these things like sending email, and that even at the time seemed, really cool, that we could send these automated emails. But then we started to ask ourselves, well, people are starting to carry more and more phones, and texting is becoming a thing. Can we start to text people reminders of when their child maybe needs an updated vaccine? And it got, and the technical side of that and figuring out all those problems and those challenges were really interesting, and building all the tools were really interesting. And I would get excited about that. And I would go to my clients' offices and work with these wonderful public health people, and I would show them all the really interesting stuff that was going on under the hood, and how we were going to use this really neat JavaScript library, and how we were going to do this in the database, and that was going to allow us to write this code that was going to do this, and we would go and we would kind of geek out about it, and they would just sit there in beautiful patience, eyes slightly glazed over, and just sort of nod along while we went into all this deep and technical minutia, and then look at us and go, that sounds great. And I can remember at the time thinking, well, why don't these folks get it? Why don't they care? Why don't they see how neat and amazing and special this is? And the truth is, partly is because they didn't quite understand it. They weren't technical people. They weren't database administrators. They weren't programmers. They didn't get all the nuance. And they also didn't care. And there was a part of me that honestly was a little almost offended by that. Like, how can you not care about these systems and how all this works? I mean, obviously, this is the most important thing, right? Because without this code, none of the rest of this works. And I remember through the course of a couple of conversations, working with one public health nurse who very lovingly and gently reminded me that at the end of the day, the code, as important as it was, wasn't the most important thing. The system that we were building wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was the kid. The most important thing was making sure that as many children as possible had the opportunity to start life in as healthy a way as possible. That success wasn't measured by how efficient our database was. Success was measured by how healthy the children in that community were. And at the end of the day, that's what she really cared about. And in her own way, she invited me to care about that as well. So in truth, diversity is quite simply God's plan. And it's God's plan because none of us can do it all ourselves, right? We all, first and foremost, need to bring our gifts to the table. We need to recognize that we have them. We have gifts. We have gifts. We have passions. We have things that we are excited about. We have talents. We have all of these things, and we need to recognize that we have those things, and we have those things to offer ourselves and each other. But other people have gifts too, and those gifts may be different from ours, and their gifts may make up for those places where we are lacking, and our gifts may make up for places where they are lacking. And together, when we work together and celebrate all of these different gifts coming together, it is then that we can be the people that God wants us to be. It's then that we can fill the call that God has put on our lives to go to all the corners of the earth and to be fruitful and to bring the grace and peace and love to those places that God so desperately wants us to do. But to do that, to really understand that, then we need to have something else in the center of our lives. It can't be a tower designed to keep us all looking and thinking the same, right? It can't be that. And it probably shouldn't be things like, which cable news station do you listen to? What newspaper or website do you read? What party do you belong to? It's not supposed to be things. It's supposed to be something else. And perhaps John Wesley, speaking to, who as the founder of Methodism and speaking to his own, frankly, rather divided community of the time, said it best when he said, "Though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike. May we not be of one heart, though we are not of one opinion. Without all doubt, we may. Herein all children of God may unite, notwithstanding these smaller differences." It's not that God doesn't want us united. It's not that God doesn't want us working together. And in fact, far from it. But what's important is the how we do that. It can't be a kind of working together where we demand everybody look and act and speak and be exactly the same. It has to be a kind of working together where everybody's gift and specialness and graces and contributions are valued. And it's when all of those come together, when it's the gift of the wisdom we get from our older members combined with some of the energy and passion we have with our younger members, it's when all of these things come together that we are able to be the church, be the community, be the people that God wants us to be. So let us strive for that, especially in these times with all the challenges that come. Let us all bring our gifts, bring what we have, give whatever it is that God has given to us to bear. And let us look to one another. Let us celebrate the gifts that other people bring. And let us strive not to be of one mind, not to think the same or vote the same, or any of those other things. But let us strive to love the same. Let us strive to love the way that God's Son taught us to love. Let us strive to love God, love our neighbor, and love ourselves. Because when we do those things, when we place that at the center of who we are, then we are the kind of community, the kind of place, the kind of church that God is trying to bring.